If selling your soul was real, it probably wouldn't happen the way most people imagine. No fire, no demons, no contracts. In fact, if somebody wanted your soul, the last thing they'd do is ask for it. They'd ask for something much smaller, an hour, a compromise, a habit. That's usually how people lose things they never intended to lose. Not all at once, gradually. Which is why I find it interesting that some of the most successful people in the world often end up describing their lives in ways that sound strangely similar. Prince spent years fighting for ownership of his own music. Michael Jackson spoke openly about loneliness despite being one of the most recognized people on the planet. Countless actors, musicians, athletes, and creators have spent decades chasing a dream only to arrive there and discover something wasn't quite right. And before anybody says, that's just the price of success, here's the uncomfortable part. The same pattern shows up in ordinary people. People who will never be famous. People who will never walk a red carpet. People who wake up every morning convinced they're making their own decisions. Because the more you look into human behavior, the harder it becomes to ignore a strange possibility. Maybe selling your soul isn't an event. Maybe it's a process. And if that's true, then the real question isn't whether celebrities are doing it. The real question is whether the rest of us are doing it too. One of the first names that always appears in this conversation is Prince. Not because of anything supernatural. Because of what happened after he became successful. By the time Prince started fighting his record label, he already had the fame. He already had the money. Yet he spent years arguing over ownership and control. At one point, he even appeared in public with the word slave written across his face. Most people focused on the word. The more interesting question is why he felt the need to use it. Psychologists have spent decades studying autonomy, the feeling that your choices belong to you. What's surprising is that people don't just need rewards, they need control. Take away enough control and frustration starts appearing, even when the rewards remain enormous. That's what made Prince's story so interesting. The money wasn't the issue, the freedom was. Michael Jackson presents a different puzzle. Few people in history experienced more attention than he did. Millions admired him. Millions knew his name. Yet he repeatedly spoke about loneliness. That sounds contradictory until you realize attention and connection are not the same thing. Psychology makes that distinction very clear. A person can be recognized by the entire world and still feel completely isolated. In some cases, fame actually makes genuine relationships harder because people stop interacting with the individual and start interacting with the image. Then social media arrived and brought these pressures to everyone else. For decades, this kind of psychological environment belonged mostly to celebrities. Now, anybody with a phone can experience it. The moment numbers appear, behavior starts changing. Not because people are weak, because rewards are powerful. A creator uploads something, it performs well. The brain notices, the creator does more of it. Months pass, the content changes. Years pass, the creator changes. The audience notices. The creator often doesn't. That's how adaptation works. It rarely feels dramatic while it's happening. And that's what makes platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok so fascinating. Their business isn't really content. Their business is attention. The longer attention stays, the more valuable it becomes. Once you understand that, a lot of modern behavior starts making sense. Why people obsess over engagement, why creators study algorithms, why billions are spent understanding human behavior. Attention became valuable. Human behavior followed. Which brings us back to the original idea. Maybe selling your soul isn't describing a supernatural deal. Maybe it's describing something much simpler. The process of slowly reshaping yourself around a reward. The reward changes. The psychology doesn't. It's easy to keep looking outward. At celebrities, at corporations, at social media platforms, at politicians, at systems. It's much harder to turn the lens around. Because the moment you do, the conversation becomes personal. Most people hear a phrase like, selling your soul, and immediately imagines somebody else, a famous person, a greedy executive, somebody powerful, rarely themselves. But if everything we've talked about so far is true, then that might be the biggest mistake, because the same psychological forces don't suddenly disappear when fame disappears. They operate everywhere, in ordinary lives, in choices that seem too small to matter. Think about how many people spend years doing things they hate, not because they enjoy them, neither because they believe in them, because leaving feels dangerous. The paycheck arrives, and the routine becomes familiar. Just like that, years pass. Eventually, the person can't tell the difference between what they chose and what they adapted to. That's simple psychology. The brain values certainty more than you'd realize. Even unhappy certainty can feel safer than uncertain freedom. That's one reason people stay in situations they claim to hate, because familiarity has become more comfortable than change. And that's where this discussion starts becoming uncomfortable. Because suddenly, we're no longer talking about control from the outside. We're talking about participation, the possibility that people cooperate with systems that make them miserable, just because the alternative feels worse. History is full of examples like this. People defending jobs they hate. You protecting beliefs you even no longer believe. Someone chasing goals they never stopped to question, only to pursuit, which then becomes their identity. And identity is hard to change. Once people build a story about who they are, they become emotionally attached to it. The story becomes familiar and safe, even when the story stops making sense. That's why some people spend decades climbing a ladder before asking whether they ever wanted to be on it. The question arrives late, sometimes very late, after the promotions, after the achievements, after the sacrifices. Then, one day they look around and realize they have everything they were supposed to want. And yet something still feels missing. That's when they see that success has answered the wrong question. This is what makes the idea of selling your soul so powerful. Not the mythology or the superstition. Only the mere possibility that a person can become so focused on external rewards that they slowly lose contact with their internal compass. Not overnight, rather, gradually. So gradually that the process feels normal. Maybe that's why the phrase survived for so long. A person begins with one set of values. The environment offers rewards. The person adapts. Years later, they barely resemble where they started. So how do people actually sell their soul? Maybe they don't. That's just the name people gave to a process they couldn't explain. A musician spends years chasing a record deal. An employee spends years chasing a promotion. A student spends years chasing a future they were told to want. Nothing unusual about that. The strange part comes later, when the goal is finally reached, because that's where many people discover something they weren't expecting. The reward solved the problem they had, not the one they felt. And those are rarely the same thing. That's why some people reach the top and immediately start looking for another mountain. For most of history, people interpreted this as a spiritual problem. Today, psychology looks at it differently. The human mind is remarkably good at adapting. Give it enough time and almost anything becomes normal. Success becomes normal. Wealth becomes normal. Recognition becomes normal. The dream becomes routine. Then the search starts again. Because they noticed how easy it is for a person to spend years pursuing something without ever stopping to ask why. And once that question disappears, almost any path can start feeling like the right one. That's the uncomfortable part. Not that somebody might deceive you, that you might never think to question the direction you're already moving. And by the time you do, years may have already passed. Hope this video has rang a bell.